The first test of the latest chapter in rugby's greatest rivalry delivered exactly the kind of intensity and drama that fans expected, but the final result belonged to New Zealand, who produced a composed and disciplined performance to defeat South Africa 33-16 at Ellis Park. For the All Blacks, the victory was built on clinical attacking moments, strong individual performances and an ability to punish mistakes when opportunities appeared. For the Springboks, the defeat was more frustrating because they created pressure in important areas, particularly at scrum time and through their powerful ball carriers, but too many errors prevented them from turning that pressure into points. And as the dust settles on the opening test, there are several players and decisions that deserve a closer look, because this match may have provided important clues about what could happen when these two teams meet again. One of the biggest winners was Jordan, who once again showed why he is regarded as one of the most complete attacking players in world rugby. Jordan added 2 more tries to his growing international tally, but his performance was about much more than finishing opportunities. He was constantly involved, looked dangerous whenever he had space and showed the willingness to contribute in the less glamorous areas of the game as well. One of his most impressive moments came at the breakdown, where he produced a superb turnover that demonstrated his ability to influence the match even when he was not carrying the ball. Against a Springboks side known for its physicality, Jordan did not simply wait for attacking chances. He actively searched for ways to make an impact. Another major winner was Jordie Barrett, who delivered one of the most complete performances of the night. Barrett was outstanding defensively, making crucial interventions when South Africa threatened to break through, while also contributing heavily in possession. His ability to read the game was particularly important because the Springboks repeatedly tried to challenge the All Blacks through their powerful runners and direct attacking approach. Barrett responded with excellent positioning, strong decision-making and a remarkable work rate. He also finished the match with 5 turnovers, underlining just how influential he was around the contest area. In attack, his contribution was equally valuable because he rarely rushed his decisions. Instead, he consistently looked for the right option, helping New Zealand maintain control and make the most of their opportunities. If there was one player who seemed comfortable in almost every part of the game, it was Jordie Barrett. Fabian Holland was another clear winner for the All Blacks, especially considering that this was only his 3rd test match since returning from injury. There was always going to be a question about whether Holland could immediately rediscover his previous level, but he answered that question with a strong performance in the middle of the forward battle. His try was particularly important as he charged down Grant Williams and turned a moment of pressure into points for New Zealand. He also contributed in the line-out and worked hard around close quarters. There were a few moments in the second half when his influence dipped, but overall it was a highly encouraging return against one of the most physical forward packs in international rugby. George Bower also deserves credit because his selection on the bench had attracted attention before the match. When Ethan de Groot was forced off with a head injury, Bower entered the contest and found himself facing a huge challenge against the Springboks scrum. Rather than allowing the situation to become a major weakness, he battled hard and helped the All Blacks compete effectively in the set piece. It was not necessarily a flawless performance, but it was an important contribution at a time when New Zealand needed stability. The result also reflected well on Dave Rennie, who had several difficult decisions to make before kickoff. His selection of Fabian Holland proved valuable, while the decision to include George Bower also paid off when the front row was disrupted. Rennie had chosen to trust players who were not necessarily the obvious selections in every position, and the performance suggested that those calls were justified. Patrick Tuipulotu was another interesting part of the selection picture. His physicality had made him a strong candidate for the starting side, but he ultimately found himself in the second row and delivered a performance that strengthened the case for him to remain there in the next test. For Dave Rennie, that creates a positive selection dilemma, because the All Blacks now have several players competing for limited spots in the forward pack. On the South Africa side, there were still some individual performances that stood out despite the disappointing result. Wilco Louw was one of them. Starting ahead of Thomas du Toit, Louw gave the Springboks a strong platform at scrum time and created problems for Ethan de Groot. He earned several penalties and remained on the field for around an hour, showing how important the set piece was to the South African game plan. The problem was that the pressure created by the scrum was not consistently converted into points. South Africa often had the physical advantage they wanted, but mistakes elsewhere prevented them from making that advantage count. Jasper Wiese was another standout for the hosts. The powerful number 8 repeatedly carried hard into the All Blacks' defensive line and helped his team gain valuable meters. Wiese was one of the players who consistently looked capable of breaking the defensive structure, but too often the support around him failed to turn those carries into sustained attacking momentum. That became one of the major themes of the match. The Springboks could generate pressure, but pressure alone was not enough against an All Blacks side that remained composed when it mattered most. One of the more difficult nights belonged to Sasha Feinberg-Mngomezulu. After looking short of his best against Argentina, the fly half again struggled to find consistent rhythm against New Zealand. There were flashes of quality, and some of his difficulties were caused by teammates failing to complete passes or maintain attacking momentum. However, as the scoreboard pressure increased, Feinberg-Mngomezulu appeared to force some decisions rather than allowing the game to come to him. That will naturally lead to questions about selection for the next test, particularly with Manie Libbok available and carrying previous experience against the All Blacks. It would be premature to say that a change is certain, but South Africa will need to decide whether they want to give Feinberg-Mngomezulu another opportunity or introduce a different option at fly half. Grant Williams also had a mixed evening. His box kicking was generally effective, apart from the charge down that directly contributed to the All Blacks' attack, but his overall distribution from the base of the ruck lacked the speed and fluidity that the Springboks needed. At times he appeared to take an extra look before moving the ball, and that allowed the All Blacks' defense to reset. Some of that may have been linked to the tactical instructions, particularly the emphasis on the box kick, but there were also moments when better decision-making could have created more attacking opportunities. Perhaps the biggest disappointment for South Africa, however, was the performance of the so-called bomb squad. The replacements were expected to make a major impact during the final stages, but instead the bench failed to provide the momentum that has become such a familiar feature of Rassie Erasmus teams. Gerhard Steenkamp initially continued the strong work of Arendse, but once Zachary Poor then entered the contest, the scrum became less reliable. Andre Esterhuizen did provide explosive energy when he came on, but his introduction was influenced by the injury to Kurtley Arendse, which disrupted the planned backline combinations. Marco van Staden and Kobus Reinach both received yellow cards, while Kobus Wiese struggled to make the desired impact during his late cameo. For a team that has built so much of its reputation around the power and influence of its bench, this was an unusually quiet contribution. The injury situation also became a concern for South Africa. Kurtley Arendse and Cheslin Kolbe were both forced from the field, leaving the Springboks without two important options in the back three. Their absence forced players into unfamiliar combinations and contributed to the lack of cohesion that became more noticeable as the second half developed. The status of both players will therefore be closely watched ahead of the next meeting. On the All Blacks side, Josh Moorby experienced a more difficult evening. After making a strong impression in his early test appearances, Moorby found himself under significant pressure against the Springboks. He scored a try, but he was also beaten by Andre Esterhuizen for South Africa's only try and struggled at times when the hosts challenged him with high kicks. It was a useful reminder that international rugby can expose even talented players when opponents identify a specific area to target. Moorby still deserves patience and another opportunity, but the match highlighted the areas of his game that will need improvement. The All Black scrum was another concern despite the victory. New Zealand eventually found ways to compete more effectively, but there were periods when the Springboks clearly had the upper hand. The concern for Dave Rennie is that this has become a recurring issue since the 2023 Rugby World Cup. The same starting front row that featured in the World Cup final was involved again here, and the coaching structure has also remained familiar. That naturally raises questions about whether the loss of influential forwards such as Brodie Retallick and Sam Whitelock has affected the balance of the pack, or whether some of the current forwards need to rediscover their best form. Whatever the explanation, the All Blacks cannot afford to ignore the problem because the Springboks will continue testing that area. Josh Lord also endured a challenging evening. His talent is clear, but against the size and physicality of the Springboks forward pack, he struggled to impose himself in the same way as some of the other locks. After leaving the field with a head injury, his place in the next match could come under consideration, especially with New Zealand possessing several options in the second row. That selection battle could become one of the most interesting stories heading into the second test. For Rassie Erasmus, the defeat will be frustrating because the basic strategy was clear and, in several areas, effective. The Springboks wanted to use their scrum to create penalties, challenge the All Blacks in the air, attack through powerful carriers and use their maul to build pressure. Those tactics did create opportunities, but the problem was the lack of balance and the number of unforced errors. Passes went to ground, attacking sequences broke down and important moments were not converted into points. Against an opponent as clinical as New Zealand, those mistakes become extremely expensive. Erasmus and his coaching staff cannot control every individual error, but they will certainly review how the overall attacking structure can become more flexible and unpredictable. The most important lesson from this match may be that neither side is close to a finished product. New Zealand have the confidence of a 33-16 victory, but their scrum remains an area that demands attention, while South Africa still have the physical tools to challenge the All Blacks but must become more accurate and disciplined with possession. The opening test has therefore set up the next chapter perfectly. The All Blacks will want to build on the performances of Jordan, Jordie Barrett, Fabian Holland and the wider forward pack, while Dave Rennie will need to decide whether to keep faith with the same combination or make changes based on what he saw at Ellis Park. Meanwhile, Rassie Erasmus faces his own selection questions, particularly around the fly-half position, the fitness of Arendse and Cheslin Kolbe, and the effectiveness of the bomb squad. The biggest takeaway is that New Zealand were better when the decisive moments arrived, while South Africa created enough pressure to make the contest competitive but could not consistently turn that pressure into points. With another test still to come, there is no reason to assume the rivalry has been settled by one result. If anything, the opening match has created even more questions. Can the Springboks fix their handling errors and make their forward dominance count? Can the All Blacks strengthen their scrum before it becomes a bigger problem? Will Jordan and Jordie Barrett continue their outstanding form, and will Dave Rennie keep the same forward combination after such a demanding test? Those answers will shape the next encounter, and after a 33-16 victory at Ellis Park, the All Blacks have certainly given themselves the perfect platform from which to continue the fight.